Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume. It's the week of August 26th, and this is your Monday briefing. Both the House and the Senate are in recess and return September 9th for a 3-week work period. Today on Monday briefing, we're going to focus on tariffs, a potential pain point for some companies. Both the Trump and Biden administrations have proposed China-focused tariffs, and now, with a new Democratic candidate, depending on the outcome of this year's presidential election, there could be further trade developments which affect not only companies, but our relationship with other countries. PwC hosted a webcast last week covering trade and tariffs, which explored the impact as well as the mechanics of how companies deal with tariff issues. And joining us to talk about this further is Kristin Bohl, a partner in PwC's Customs and International Trade practice out of Chicago. Kristin, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you today.
So, Kristin, let's start with which tariff issues are keeping company executives awake at night.
Sindhu, I think probably the biggest thing that is keeping company executives awake at night is uncertainty. Geopolitical landscape is something that continues to shift alongside both economic and political disruption, and that has company executives unsure of what's around the corner for them. That includes tariff uncertainty. The outcome of the election could lead to really dramatically different tariff outcomes, which at the end of the day are costs that company executives have to manage. Furthermore, there are corresponding impacts to broader tax, and the way that companies think about operating models and footprint structuring may hinge on that outcome. With tariffs, everyone knows what happened last time around. This is our second time seeing this movie. Tariffs equal increased costs. And the questions that companies have to ask of themselves are, how do they manage those costs? Can they pass those on to consumers? Or are those costs that they can absorb throughout their value chain? And is it to move or not to move, right? Their sourcing and their operations. So these are the things, Sindhu, that I think companies are concerned about right now.
All of what you just said is the company-focused impact. And what is the global ripple effect or potential ripple effect of the U.S.-based tariffs?
Well, more tariffs really lead to higher prices. And we're already seeing this global ripple effect in places like Mexico with recent policy developments there. Earlier this year, the Mexican Authority imposed 5% to 50% tariffs on certain specified products. They also, earlier this year, stopped granting tariff relief for maquiladoras that make temporary imports for manufacture of finished goods that are subsequently re-exported. Now, the combined effect of this in the Mexico space, for example, has us asking questions about the attractiveness of the maquiladora structure more broadly. So that's a pretty significant potential ripple effect of the tariffs. Another ripple effect, I think, is increased regionalism coming out of existing trading blocs, such as USMCA. But also, if we think sort of outside of just the realm of the US, globally, I think we're going to potentially see more regionalism across things like Asia Pac and, pacts like ASEAN and things like that. Ultimately, do we also see increased isolationism if other countries continue to react to US tariffs with tariffs of their own? It also raises questions about whether or not China may be more reactionary this time around due to the severity of some of the tariffs that are being proposed here. The last thing, Sindhu, that I would mention here are digital services taxes, because again, from a global perspective, digital services taxes are something we've been talking about for quite some time. And we know, because of the way DSTs were responded to last time, that there's a significant potential for retaliatory tariffs to be put in place if DSTs are imposed. So that starts to feel, Sindhu, like a real tit for tat, where trade policy starts to extend its reach into other policy areas.
All right. And the webcast that you hosted last week, which, by the way, for a note for our viewers, we'll have a link to a replay in the description of this episode. But you also covered the role of the tax department. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, Sindhu, my colleagues shared a really interesting point of view on the webcast. And it is that Companies need to make sure their operating model strategy is fully baked before they make decisions and pull those levers of change on those operating models. As companies are examining their strategy for managing all of the uncertainty that we just talked about, they shouldn't pull a supply chain lever without considering the tax consequences. Sindhu, I recently worked with a company that manufactured its products in China, and they were getting hit very hard with the tariffs. So they decided to move manufacturing to Mexico to avoid the tariffs and also potentially seek USMCA benefits. The problem was that they were still sourcing all of their materials from China. And as a result, not only did their products still get hit with China tariffs, even though they were being made in Mexico, they also didn't qualify for USMCA treatment. So don't decide to pack up and move from a country without considering the full cost of that move. In essence, companies need to be wary of relying on what my colleague referred to as false positives, essentially thinking that you have an efficient and optimized approach for operating model changes that has missed or ignored costs that are buried in that exit strategy. And what are those costs that companies need to be aware of? Well, in addition to customs costs, new and introduced customs costs, it could also be loss of customs benefits, and it could also be other exit costs associated from a tax perspective. So lots of things for companies to consider before they make those moves out of country, Sindhu.
So, Kristin, how do you anticipate the tariff landscape changing after the election?
So, candidate Harris, Sindhu, is expected to remain largely consistent with the Biden administration's track on tariffs to date. We do not have a lot of documented history of her positions. She's indicated that she's not a protectionist Democrat and that she supports trade policies that promote exports and allow American goods to be sold overseas. She has been critical of Trump's policy as lacking nuance. The other interesting part about Harris's platform is that she voted against previous multilateral agreements, one of which was USMCA. And that's interesting because USMCA is due to be re-upped in 2026. So we will see what happens there. General consensus is we need to wait to see a debate between Harris and Trump to learn more about her tariff policies. With candidate Trump, there's more to go on. He has promised to expand on his earlier imposed tariffs, which includes up to a 60% tariff on Chinese origin goods, 100 to 200% tariff on Mexican origin goods, and a 10 to 20% across the board tariff. Now, Sindhu, it's hard to know if what we've heard from candidate Trump to date is a complete picture. However, all of this contributes to the uncertainty that company executives are facing as they make their plans for the coming years.
That is all very interesting. Kristin, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to not only provide an update on what's happening with companies, but also on the webcast. Thank you.
My pleasure, Sindhu.
And a reminder to our viewers that we are now 71 days out from the 2024 presidential election, and Congress is scheduled to be in session 15 of those days. A link to the latest Election Watch is in the description of this episode, and more on the election from Rohit and Janice coming your way in 2 weeks. You'll also find the latest Week in Review with Janice Mays, as well as registration links for the next 2 tax readiness webcasts. Finally, we are off next Monday for the Labor Day holiday in the United States, but we'll be back that week with more on the regulatory and legislative landscape in Washington and, of course, on election developments. Until then, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great week. Take care.